Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Lions Grid. It's Friday, which means not only is the weekend here, Joe, but it's time once again for our fantasy football focus episode. I think we should touch on it quickly, though, from yesterday. Of course, you finally broke the unlucky streak that we were having with Thursday Night Footballs, correctly picking the Eagles to take down the Packers at Lambeau. So at the moment, just like how the Lions are technically in first place in the NFC North with the highest winning percentage, you tied things up here heading into the week. So I'm going to need a big Sunday to keep my lead in check.
Right on. I had to go with the Eagles. I knew you were going with the Packers, and I just thought that they were going to have a bounce back game. And it just goes to show that if, Detroit can beat the Eagles and Philly, the Eagles can beat the Packers in Lambeau, it shows that Detroit's not that far off. And, you expect it to be, Green Bay's still up there because they got 3 wins. But you look at the standings and you're like, well, yeah, but Detroit doesn't have a loss. Their win percentage is .833, which is better than Green Bay's. So it's like, wow, Detroit's in first place.
Yep, they're holding on to that for the moment, so it'll be interesting to see. If they get a win against the Chiefs, they'll continue to hold on to it. But certainly an opportunity for them there. But going to be interesting to keep an eye on that NFC North race, and of course we'll be doing that all season long with our Kings of the North segment, which is on the Tuesdays following the games. So for today, just like last week where we looked at Michael Fabiano's from the NFL Network, we took a look at his picks. This week, we're going to be focusing on the Stardom and Situm guide from Jamey Eisenberg from CBS Sports. I put a link down to his article in the description of the video, and there's also a link to his Twitter page and his Twitter handle if anyone wants to follow him. So these picks we're going to be going over, these are his recommendations for week 4. The ones that aren't covered in here are his picks for the Packers and Eagles game. Since they've already played, you either had them in your lineup or you didn't. I figured there was no point in going over those here today. But we'll go ahead and run through who he recommends starting and sitting for the other teams at the various positions. So to kick things off, Joe, we're going to take a look here at the QBs he's recommending starting. You got Phillip Rivers. You have Daniel Jones, Matt Stafford, and Kyle Allen. So Phillip Rivers, he's playing Miami, which is a good team to be playing if you're looking to score some fantasy points. Daniel Jones is up against the Washington Redskins. Of course, Matt Stafford will be taking on Kansas City at home. And then Kyle Allen will be going on the road to take on the Texans. So those are the 4 QBs that he likes as starts this week. And of course, the one that I didn't go over here, Joe, but his pick of the week is also Jared Goff. Jared Goff is his start of the week, so and they're of course going up against Tampa Bay. Considering Goff and the 4 QBs we have here shown below, Joe, are there any of these guys that really stand out to you as a potential guy that could have a pretty solid fantasy day on Sunday?
Well, I heard news today that Stafford's suffering from a little bit of a hamstring or hip agitation. Practice all week, just today limited in practice. So I don't know how that's going to affect him, but definitely, I'm still biased, and I don't think Kansas City's defense is all that terrible. So I would have to say Stafford's going to have a good game, but is he going to have a better game than Phillip Rivers playing Miami? I don't think so.
Yeah, that Dolphins team doesn't look very good, so there's definitely a big chance there for Rivers. And, of course, Daniel Jones had a big game in his debut. Washington's defense, they're 28th against opposing quarterbacks, so they give up a lot of points as well, but it's going to be interesting to see if he can maintain that same level of production he did in that first game, because scoring 4 TDs, that's not a bad day for fantasy football.
Right on.
Moving on to who Jamey Eisenberg has listed as his sleepers. Case Keenum. Jacoby Brissett and Mason Rudolph. Of course, Mason Rudolph and the Steelers are taking on Cincinnati. Jacoby Brissett and the Colts are playing Oakland. And the Washington Redskins are hosting the New York Giants, as mentioned before. And, obviously Case Keenum had a very rough game against the Bears. He had a ton of turnovers. But I did actually have him in on my fantasy team, and he did end up scoring points despite the fact he was a turnover machine. So I'm not surprised to see him up here because, again, the Giants' defense hasn't been really great this season either. So definitely not a guy who you expect to, it almost seems like it's a question of when Dwayne Haskins might get the starting role there in Washington, just because it doesn't seem like Case Keenum is the solution there moving forward. But in terms of pure fantasy production, he still, gets the job done. So could be a guy especially if you're in a deep league, a good option for you if you need some points. And then Jacoby Brissett has, 646 yards on the season. He's thrown for 7 touchdowns against only 1 interception. Been very effective. Now, it kind of hurts his fantasy value that T.Y. Hilton will be missing this game. We talked about that yesterday during our injury roundup, but still proven to be a pretty capable quarterback in that system, replacing Andrew Luck. And then, of course, Mason Rudolph starting for the Steelers. Joe, what was that? 2 weeks ago, I made the pick for Cincinnati, and I had said anything relating to Andy Dalton I don't trust, but I was doing it anyways. Well, Andy Dalton plays for Cincinnati. Mason Rudolph might have a much, he didn't have a great start against San Francisco, but I think the Bengals are nowhere near as good of a team as the 49ers, so this could be a week where Mason Rudolph takes advantage of that Andy Dalton-ness. And
you mean the Steelers?
Yeah, the Steelers.
Yeah, he's getting integrated into the system. He's a new quarterback. Another week with practice, he's going to perform much better. And yeah, the Bengals, they're playing like a usual Cleveland Browns team in Ohio. So, and the Browns aren't even that good. So it's like, okay, you got the Ohio teams not even playing that good at football, and everybody was hyped up about the Browns, but that's another segment that we can talk about. But I look for the Pittsburgh's quarterback to have a better game than he did last week.
Yeah, but it's funny you mentioned the Browns, Joe, because right there, Baker Mayfield is his first quarterback listed as a sit-em this week. Then you have the Bills' Josh Allen, Jameis Winston for the Bucks, and Mitch Trubisky for the Bears. The Bears are playing Minnesota. The Buccaneers are taking on the Rams in Los Angeles. Josh Allen's playing New England. And then Baker Mayfield and the Browns playing in Baltimore. So, yeah, to your point about that Ohio team not playing very good football, reflected here in Jamey Eisenberg's recommendation to sit Baker Mayfield this week. Josh Allen has been sneakily productive for the Bills. They're, of course, one of the 3-0 teams, but certainly going up against Bill Belichick and that Patriots defense, certainly a reason to give you pause whether or not you want to start him in fantasy or not. But, I'm not as sold on it being a sit as Jamey Eisenberg is, but certainly if you have better options in a more attractive matchup, I definitely, it's easy to see where you might choose someone else over him if you have a better option.
Yeah, the only really quarterback I have on my fantasy team is Stafford, who's said to play, but then I have the dilemma whether or not I want to have, I think I have Deshaun Watson starting right now, so it's like, do I want to swap out Stafford for Watson? That's the question I have.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting one. I believe Watson, in terms of what Jamey Eisenberg is predicting, Deshaun Watson is one of those guys where he has him as being a start pretty much no matter what. But the fact that he does have Stafford listing as a stardom, of course, you pointed out earlier, and I can see Jeff in the comments section pointed out to the Stafford showing up on the injury report is questionable with that hip injury. Of course, we'll keep an eye on that and definitely let you know before the game starts, what his availability is going to be. But, as long as Stafford plays, Um, again, to your point, I don't think the Chiefs' defense is as bad as it's made out to seem, but I still think quarterbacks have an opportunity against them. They're definitely not a shut down defense. They might not be awful like Miami, but they're still not an elite defense. So. Yeah, that's a tough spot to be in. Where I could see as long as Stafford's playing and is healthy, um, certainly an attractive matchup there for him. But Deshaun Watson is one of those guys who's pretty consistent, so it's kind of that's a tough one. Taking a look here at the only QB bust he had, or only bust alert he has, he's thrown up Tom Brady. Obviously, Tom Brady has been pretty good on the season. 911 passing yards, 8 touchdowns. Kind of hard to hate on those stats from a fantasy perspective. But this is going to be the toughest defense in the Buffalo Bills that New England has seen this season. This will kind of be a good game to gauge whether or not the Bills' defense is for real or not. So it will be interesting in that regard. So I think that might be part of the reason why he's listed here as a potential bust alert. This is definitely the toughest test of the season. He has struggled in the last couple of seasons against Buffalo, even though, of course, the Patriots have had success, but could be a tough week. Maybe if you have somebody with a better matchup, you sit Brady down this week, but I believe in standard leagues he's averaging at least 24 points in most leagues each week. So, take it with a grain of salt. Bills definitely their toughest test so far, but we're not really sure yet if the Bills are a legit defense or not. Moving into the running backs, 5 running backs listed as stardom. We got Marlon Mack with the Colts, and they're playing Oakland. We got LaShawn McCoy against Detroit. Chris Carson with the Seahawks going up against Arizona. The replacement for Saquon Barkley that we mentioned yesterday, Wayne Gallman, going up against Washington. And then James Conner against Cincinnati. So no real surprises there, Joe. Like I mentioned yesterday, Wayne Gallman will be getting most of the snaps there in place of the injured Saquon Barkley. So I think he's a stardom just because he's going to be getting the bulk of the carries there. This will be a good way to gauge how successful he's going to be in to fill in for Barkley. Certainly, I don't think anyone expects him to put up Barkley's numbers, but he'll definitely at least be getting the handoffs that Barkley was getting. And then taking a look at the other ones, Marlon Mack certainly proven to be an every down back for the Colts. LaShawn McCoy marked as active and healthy for this game against the Lions. Chris Carson, we mentioned he has had a little bit of fumbling issues, but should get a majority of the touches there for the Seahawks. And then James Conner, they're hoping that he can have a bounce back game because he hasn't really had a whole lot of fantasy success here yet this season. But the Bengals' rush defense is 31st against the run, so certainly an opportunity there for him to make fantasy owners like myself happier than we've been in these first couple of weeks by taking advantage of a team that's weak against the run. Moving to the sleepers, kind of surprising to see this first guy here, Rex Burkhead of the Patriots. Of course, they're going up against Buffalo. Chris Thompson for Washington against New York. And then the other guy that wasn't a Packer or a Charger on the list was Darrell Williams, the de facto second-string running back with Damian Williams projected to be out against the Lions. Could be getting the splitting some time with LaShawn McCoy there for the Chiefs. Obviously, Rex Burkhead has been taking some time from that backfield. The Patriots are very much a running back by committee. They have Burkhead, they have James White. He was out last week, so that helped him get some more action. And then really, Sony Michel, and we'll see him here later in the bust alert for running back. But with the injury to James Devlin, the Patriots fullback, Sony Michel's role in that offense was very much wherever James Devlin's going, you run behind him, and was what Sony Michel does. With him James Devlin that is out, that certainly is going to hurt the usage of Sony Michel in the offense. And the thing that Rex Burkhead adds that Sony Michel doesn't is an involvement in the passing game. He has 13 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown, in addition to his 112 yards running the ball. So I think that's probably, all that factors in to why Jamey Eisenberg has him listed here as a sleeper, but certainly was surprised to see him pop up, Joe. He's certainly not a guy I was expecting to see here. Moving on to the running backs to sit this week. Tariq Cohen is the first guy listed here. The Bears, of course, playing Minnesota again. Peyton Barber, the running back for the Buccaneers, going up against the Rams. Frank Gore against New England. And then Duke Johnson against Carolina. So no big surprises here, Joe. A lot of, I guess the one that's the most surprising, taking a look at some of the stats, is the Peyton Barber against the Rams, because the Rams have given up they're the 25th rated defense against the run, so they're not very good. Of course, the issue with Barber is that he is splitting time with Ronald Jones, and it kind of seems to vary week to week. Whoever's got the hot hand is sort of the running back that gets the touches. So from a fantasy perspective, certainly difficult there to gauge, who's going to have the hot hand on Sunday and is going to get the bulk of the work. But otherwise, Frank Gore makes sense. Duke Johnson trying to fill in for Lamar Miller down there in Houston, but really hasn't done a whole lot. And then Tariq Cohen definitely seems to have given up the featured back role to David Montgomery. Hasn't been catching the ball a whole lot. Does have 12 receptions, but on the season, but still not a whole lot of production here in recent weeks. So no real surprises here on the sit-em side of things. And then, as mentioned, the bust alert is Sony Michel for the Patriots. As mentioned, that injury to James Devlin is the big thing there because, again, his sole job in that Patriots offense is to wherever James Devlin leads him, he follows him in. So without having Devlin there to pave the way, certainly going to be interesting to see how the Patriots use him moving forward.
A lot of Patriots on this bust alert.
Yeah, I think it seems like Jamey Eisenberg definitely thinks Buffalo's defense may be for real. And you'll see later on for the other positions, it sort of shifts to being a concern for the Buccaneers instead of the Patriots. But certainly with Brady and Michelle popping up here with the first two bust alerts, definitely thinks that Buffalo's defense should be able to give that Patriots offense at least a tough time. On the wide receiver fronts, at stardom, we got Larry Fitzgerald, Robert Woods, Sterling Shepard, Terry McLaurin, and Marquise Hollywood Brown are your 5 stardom picks there. Of course, Larry Fitzgerald has 18 receptions on the season, 253 yards and 2 touchdowns, and will be going up against Seattle. Robert Woods, 13 receptions for 143 yards, going up against Tampa Bay. Sterling Shepard has 13 receptions for 142 yards and a touchdown, going up against Washington. Terry McLaurin, who was very active in that game against the Bears, has 16 receptions for 257 yards and 3 TDs. And then Hollywood Brown, 14 receptions for 282 yards and 2 touchdowns. So all of these guys are definitely players who have had production on the season. Outside of Robert Woods, everyone's found the end zone at least once. And certainly they seem all to have favorable matchups here. So a lot of good options there if you're looking for people to start from Jamey Eisenberg. Moving on to the sleepers. And Joe, this should be encouraging for you because I know he's on your team. Of course, we'll start with Mecole Hardman. He's the wide receiver there for Kansas City. Then the one that will excite you, Marvin Jones Jr. for the Lions.
That's good to see because I had to drop Antonio Brown, and I'm like, okay, that means my other wide receivers are going to have to pick up production.
And it's he definitely had a good game last week, so we'll see what happens here. And then just to round out the last two, you have DK Metcalf for Seattle and Mike Williams for the Chargers. Uh, the only thing I don't like about Marvin Jones, Joe, is more so just how the Lions' offense has functioned. In the last through the first 3 weeks, they do have 4 receivers that have 100 yards receiving and a touchdown. But it's the fact that they seem to be doing it and spreading out the ball that has me concerned about one guy being the number one, being the number one receiver in back-to-back weeks. They seem to.
Yeah, it might not be good for fantasy numbers, but as far as team play is concerned, if you have 4 or 5 guys on your team that can get 100 yards and a touchdown in a game, it's like the defense doesn't know what to do. They can't double a particular person. They can't game plan for a particular receiver. If everybody can be productive on that receiving core, can really cause some fits for the defense.
Yeah, and certainly that's the challenge, right, too. Like, you have the teams you're a fan of and you want to see them do well, but with with fantasy football becoming such a force, fantasy football is very much a sort of a greedy sort of thing where you're just interested in how your players are performing. You need your guys to score points, and sometimes that doesn't always align up with the teams you're the fan of, or just the success of the team overall. You kind of want it to be, I don't just want them to score, I want them to score with my guy. So
right. There's been times this season when I've had an Arizona wide receiver or a Charger running back, and it's like, I don't want them to do well on offense, but if they're going to get a touchdown, give it to, the running back for the Chargers. If they're going to, complete a pass, throw it to the wide receiver that I have on my fantasy team from Arizona. It's like you want to see your team play well, but at the same time, it's like if they're going to get yards, then hopefully it goes to the player I have that can pick up some points.
Most certainly. I'm in that same boat. I have that same thought. It's like, if you're going to hurt me, at least hurt me in a way that also helps me, please.
Right.
Taking a look here at the guys that he's recommending sitting at the wide receiver spot, we have Stephon Diggs, who has had kind of a quiet season here for Minnesota. We have Allen Robinson for the Bears, John Brown for the Bills, and DJ Chark for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Joe, I know in terms of yardage, Allen Robinson has done some good stuff for you. 17 receptions on the year, 203 yards. Still missing out on a touchdown. But, of course, their matchup against the Minnesota Vikings probably plays in a big part there.
I think that, in order for them to pick up points, they're going to have to score a touchdown with their playmakers. That's 2 Chicago Bears that are on the sit 'em. The Tyreek Cohen and Allen Robinson, some playmakers out of the backfield and the number one wide receiver. It's like, I guess they're really picking these Bears not to put up too much offense against Minnesota's defense.
Yeah, I think they are thinking it's going to be a little bit of a defensive struggle, but, to that point we just had about, wishing they'd funnel stuff towards our fantasy players. It would have been nice last week, if one of those touchdown passes that Gabriel caught, because he had 3 in that game, if one of those could have made their way over to Allen Robinson, could have had a big fantasy impact. So, the Bears passing game did come to life there a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, if Mitchell Trubisky can keep that going. And if they can, that certainly lends itself to being good for Allen Robinson. But I definitely think the matchup between 2 very good defenses there in this NFC North showdown is why you have both Diggs and Robinson listed here on the sit-em. And then, of course, with John Brown, he is the number 1 receiver in Buffalo, but the quarterback was already on the sit-em list for the QB. So if the QB is a sit, generally speaking, you're going to see the top wide receiver on the sit side of things too. And then taking a look at DJ Chark, he has sort of emerged as the number 1 receiver for Jacksonville. I think he's caught a touchdown pass in all 3 games or something like that. But the Broncos have been doing a pretty good job of keeping wide receivers in check. They've given up, they're the 4th best defense against wide receivers. So they haven't been giving up a whole lot of points. So certainly that's why you have DJ showing up there, because so far they've held Allen Robinson in check when they played the Bears, Devontae Adams when they played the Packers, And, even though the Packers lost last night, I'm sure if you were a fantasy football owner of Devontae Adams, you're feeling pretty good after the night he turned in last night. Moving to the bust alert, like I mentioned, you're going to see some Tampa Bay Buccaneers start to show up here, and Mike Evans is the guy listed here. Again, you had the quarterback there listed as a sit-em during the sit-em part, so Jameis Winston, Jamey Eisenberg's already recommending sitting him. So again, if he's predicting the QB is gonna struggle in this matchup, it's not surprising to see, his playmakers show up as potential busts, because if the QB is gonna struggle, how else are they gonna get the ball, right? Moving on to the tight ends. Only 3 starters listed here. We got Darren Waller. We mentioned him last week when we were looking at Michael Fabiano's pick. Pretty big part of that Raiders offense. Of course, they're going up against Indianapolis this weekend. Will Disley, the now firmly first-string tight end for the Seattle Seahawks after they traded his backup to the Steelers, going up against the Cardinals. And Joe, you're Delaney Walker. I know you at least have him in one league, coming in as a start this week as the Titans square off with the Falcons.
Yeah, I've been trying to find a backup for Delaney Walker in both leagues, and it's like, man, I just think that it's going to be a 1-week replacement when it's, switching out Delaney Walker if he can stay healthy. Every week, he's projected 13 points. So it's like, that's a lot of points from the tight end position.
Yeah, and like I said, tight ends are one of those positions that's very touchdown heavy. Like if your guy can get open in that end zone when they're making a red zone trip and catch a touchdown pass, you're going to have a good fantasy football week. So tight ends definitely, I feel like, if you have somebody who can consistently put up points, you're in a good spot, because for the most part, your average tight end, it's either feast or famine, right? They're either going to get that touchdown and score you some points, or they're not, and you're not going to have a good time. So definitely good when you have somebody who can provide some consistency there. Taking a look at the sleepers, we have a couple of seasoned tight ends here to lead it off with. Of course, Jason Witten for the Cowboys going up against the Saints. Vernon Davis for Washington going up against the Giants. And then the third guy listed there is Jack Doyle for the Colts going up against Oakland. So, thoughts there, Joe?
Yeah, I've seen good plays from Jason Witten, touchdown machine throughout his career with Dallas. Vernon Davis is the guy who can always make a spectacular catch and then burn you with his speed. We saw week 1, he hurled a guy on his way down the field. I forgot if he got in the end zone or not, but the first 2 guys are people I've enjoyed watching play the tight end position. I haven't seen too much of Jack Doyle in Indianapolis, but I'm sure he's a seasoned veteran that has made some good plays too.
Yeah, he's surprising. I can't believe he's been around for this long, but he's been around for 7 years as well. So obviously you got 14 years with Vernon Davis, and this is the 16th year for Jason Witten. Of course, he took last year off and was on Monday Night Football, but definitely 3 veterans right there. And I think, in addition to Jack Doyle, if you do have Eric Ebron as well, he could also benefit you for the same reasons that Doyle might have a potentially a good game, and that's T.Y. Hilton being out. Jacoby Brissett and that Colts offense might lean more heavily on the tight ends with their star receiver gone. Taking a look at the sit-ems, and I can see my dad commented in that Jimmy Graham had a big game for him last night. There's only 2 listed here, and because as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we were skipping anybody from the Packers or the Eagles since they've already played. But it is, the link to the article is in the description of the video that Jamey Eisenberg published. But he does have Jimmy Graham listed as a sit-em in addition to Jared Cook and Tyler Eifert, who you see down below. So take it with a grain of salt. But taking a look at Jared Cook's numbers on the years, he only has 5 receptions for 69 yards. Tyler Eifert has 9 receptions for 54 yards. He did get a touchdown last week, which again, touchdowns can sometimes be the key to production out of your tight ends. But Tyler Eifert and the Bengals will be going up against Pittsburgh. Jared Cook and the Saints going up against Dallas. Neither seems to have played a huge part in their respective offenses, so not really surprising to see them listed here as sits for this week. Taking a look at the bust alert for tight end, he does have O.J. Howard, another Tampa Bay Buccaneer, listed here. O.J. Howard on the season has 7 receptions for 98 yards, so a little bit more yardage than the other two guys, but has yet to find that elusive touchdown to help boost up his numbers. Taking a look at who we have in the kicking department, only one stardom listed for by Jamey Eisenberg here. He's going with Joey Sly, the rookie kicker for the Carolina Panthers. He has been one of I think he's like the 7th ranked overall kicker in fantasy points right now. So a good option there. And then he does have a couple of sleepers listed here, and some of them we've seen from last week. Zane Gonzalez is one of those. Been a pretty solid kicker, currently the 9th ranked kicker in fantasy football, and he'll be going up against Seattle. Going up against him in that matchup on the other side will be Jason Myers for Seattle. He's scored the 12th most points for kickers. And then you have Aldrick Roses, who hasn't had a particularly productive fantasy season so far. He's only scored, he's the 23rd highest scoring kicker so far. But going up against Washington, it looks like Eisenberg thinks that he should be called upon to hit at least a couple of field goals in this game. So we'll have to see how that goes. But those are his recommendations there. His sit isn't really all that surprising. It's Eddie Pinheiro. Of course, he's dealing with that knee injury, and he did kick on Monday night against Washington. You could definitely tell he was favoring his leg during that whole process. So I think he's still working through that injury. Obviously, he's had more time, so hopefully it'll be better than it was. But Minnesota haven't even allowed a field goal. They've only allowed one attempt, and it wasn't even made so far. So the Vikings defense not giving up a lot of field goals, and with him coming off that injury, certainly if you have another option at kicker, might be a good time to swap them in.
You know who's not a good option at kicker is Philadelphia's kicker. He's gotten 3, 4 points, 2 points. All he does is kick extra points, and I think he missed one last night. I'm not sure how they ended up with 34. I was in and out of that game, but, you think Philadelphia getting in field goal range would put up field goals, but it's either touchdown or bust with Philadelphia, so.
Yeah, it makes it hard when the team's not trotting out the field goal team to get you some points. And then just moving on to the defenses here, his only defensive start for this week was actually the Packers' defense against Philadelphia, and again, didn't end up the way I think he was hoping it to go. But so looking here at who he had listed as sleepers, he's got the Steelers' defense against Cincinnati. Andy Dalton has 5 turnovers in 3 games, and he's also been sacked 11 times. So there's certainly a potential there for the Steelers to come through and score you some points. He's also got the Seahawks going up against Arizona. Kyler Murray has been sacked 16 times in 3 games and has also thrown 3 interceptions. So certainly opportunity there. And then the Colts going up against Oakland. It's still a high number, but it's less than the other 2 teams. Derek Carr's been sacked 7 times so far. And so there's, again, going to be some favorable matchups there for these 3 defenses, Steelers, Seahawks, and Colts, if you're looking for some teams to start this week. And then the one sit that he is recommending is the Tennessee Titans going up against Atlanta. They were a big letdown on last Thursday night when they were playing Jacksonville. Tennessee had no sacks. They didn't have any turnovers. And so they had a very low-scoring fantasy football night. Matt Ryan does have 6 interceptions on the season, so certainly if they can get him to be careless with the ball, certainly an opportunity, but he's only been sacked once in the last 2 games, so teams not being able to get pressure on him despite all the injuries to Atlanta's offensive line. Kind of surprising to see that. But that's who he's recommending that you sit this week if you have a different option going with them over the Titans. That covers all of the different positions there. As mentioned, a link to the full article is in the description of the video, so if you want to go and check out all of Jamey Eisenberg's rankings, he also has a little blurb in there. It also contains all the stats for that they have on the season, so certainly a helpful resource if you're looking for a guide. So definitely recommend checking that out if you have the time. And I also put a link down to his Twitter page as well if you want to follow him and stay up to date with all his latest news and stuff. He tweets out all his latest articles and whatnot. So be sure to check out those links in the description of the video. If you enjoyed the show, please do help the channel grow. A like on the video is fantastic, but if you really want to help us out, we are working towards that goal of 100 subscribers. So if you enjoyed what you saw here today, please consider subscribing to the channel. You can also ring the bell once you've subscribed if you want to get kept up to date when we're going live with all of our videos. We will be going live tomorrow with our Pick'em segment, Joe. So as mentioned, the unofficial score will still show me, well, the score through week 3 will still show me as being 1 game up. But here so far this week, you've closed that gap. I'm going to have some work to do tomorrow in my picks in order to make sure I keep my lead there. Otherwise, you could easily slide and through the first quarter of the season, you could be the guy leading that pick'em.
Yeah, definitely a big toss up in week 4. Lots of matchups that could go either way, and I think we're going to have a lot of difference of opinion. We've seen through the first 3 weeks, we've seen, similar favorites and learned a lot about these football teams, but now it's like, week 4 brings action, and it's like there's not really so many favorites, between one team versus the other team. So it'll definitely be fun to see and compare the picks that we have tomorrow, and to see how many we differentiate on, and then of course Sunday to see who takes the lead.
Yeah, I think we've averaged like around 3, or it's probably closer to 3, because I think there's only been like 1 week where there were 4 games where we were different. So it'll certainly, if this week has games where we're more split, certainly an opportunity for one of us to potentially get the edge there. Or I do know the week we had 4 games different, Joe, we actually split that 2-2, so we stayed even. So that's an opportunity as well. But if you're interested in seeing who we're picking in the games coming up this week on Sunday and on Monday, be sure to tune in tomorrow for our Pick'em segment. Until then, I'm Kevin Marheine. He's Joe Wilmot. We'll catch you during that Pick'em video tomorrow. And everybody have a good night and a good start to your weekend. Bye-bye.